Hey women's hockey fans, Erica Lindsay Ayala here, and you are listening to the Founding Four podcast. The Founding Four podcast is a women's hockey podcast. We are named after the first four teams, the founding four teams of the National Women's Hockey League, but we talk NCAA, PWHPA, international competition, and everything in between. But the next several episodes, you will be hearing a lot about the NWHL or hashtag NDouble. And that is because as of the day that this episode goes up, we are 1 week away from the NWHL single-site season happening in Lake Placid, New York, and I am letting longtime listeners of the Founding Four podcast audio edition know that yes, I will be a part of the broadcast team. So stay tuned for this episode with Anne Tokarski, and there's a part 2 to my conversation with Anne Tokarski, and I will let you know a little bit more of my plans for the NDouble. What I have done is I've rallied some of the NWHL and women's hockey troops, and they will be joining me to give their version of an NWHL 101. We have some other journalists and players even who are also going to give a specific 101 about one of the 6 NWHL teams, so you're not going to want to miss that. But in this episode with Anne Tokarski, in part 1, you'll hear her NWHL 101 in 2 minutes or less, and we will also talk about the Isabel Cup handles. The Isabel Cup, for those who may not know, is the trophy. It's the championship trophy for the NWHL, and there's a little bit of controversy swirling around in that Isabel Cup. So Anne gives us that. We also get into the new governance model of the NWHL and Ty Taminia as the new interim commissioner, and lots of other good stuff in part 1. In part 2, Anne is going to get you ready for the NDouble, storylines, players to watch, and she gives us her semifinals predictions. And I think some of you may be a little bit surprised. One of the founding 4 teams holds pretty high favor with Anne Tokarski. So without further ado, again, here is part 1 of my conversation about NWHL 101 with Anne Tokarski. All right, I am with Anne Tokarski here, and we are going to do a very special episode of the Founding Four podcast. Anne and Anya actually will be joining us. But the first task, Anne, that we have for you is going to be, because I'm calling you the resident expert of the NWHL. I hope you're okay with that.
Yeah, for sure.
We're rolling with it. So I figured between you and Anya, and I'll sprinkle in a little bit here and there, I think we got it covered. So your first task in this challenge that has artificially created points as determined by me is to give an overview for new fans of the NWHL. You're going to give them an overview in 2 minutes or less, and I'm going to time you right here on the clock. Are you ready, Anne?
I'm ready.
Okay, so because again, you're the resident expert, because for the Ice Garden, you've already done this. So I was like, she's not new, she's true. NWHL 101, 2 minutes or less, starting now.
So the National Women's Hockey League, or NWHL, is comprised of 6 teams throughout North America. The Buffalo Beauts, the Boston Pride, the Connecticut Whale, the Metropolitan Riveters, the Minnesota Whitecaps, and the new expansion team, the Toronto Six. Every year so far since the 2015-2016 season, these teams, for the record, 2 of these teams are expansion teams, but the first 4 teams that I mentioned have competed for the past several years in regular season where they just compete with the end goal of winning the Isabel Cup. The Isabel Cup is named for Lord Stanley of NHL fame. His daughter, Lady Isabel, was a hockey player in Canada, and the cup is named for her. So each team so far throughout the history of the NWHL, every team has won an Isabel Cup except for the founding 4 team, one of the founding 4 teams, the Connecticut Whale, and the league's newest expansion team, the Toronto Six. And yeah, I'm just really looking forward to this upcoming season where all 6 teams will be competing in a controlled environment in Lake Placid, New York. And I think everyone should tune in.
Oh, nailed it. Look at that. Time to spare.
Wow, yeah.
Crushed it. All right. So as I told you, this is a completely made up game by me. But I also timed Anya. I haven't shown you that. And obviously Anya will not see this. But how do you like your odds?
Oh, I'm not too optimistic. I think I fumbled a little bit, but it is what it is. I think I got the most important points down.
I think you crushed it. I'm going to let you know, since I was on there for both. Anya did not mention why the Isabel Cup is named the Isabel Cup.
Oh.
So that hair flip, there you go. But also, neither one of you hit on that there is the original Isabel Cup and the beautiful picture. I was there in New Jersey as it came out of, its display case for the first time. But the original, of course, design had handles.
Yes, I was thinking about that.
All right, let's get into a little bit of the handles. So the Isabel Cup originally had 2 beautiful handles, and it hasn't had those handles for quite some time. So, Anne, what do you know about the handles? What should new fans know about the Izzy Cup and the handles?
Well, you mentioned Anya. I don't know if I'm the right person to talk about this, considering she had a hand in dehandling the cup. But from the lore that I've understood and heard, is one of the cup handles Anya broke off, and then because the Isabel Cup couldn't just have one handle, that would make it a little lopsided. She tore off the other one just to make things look symmetrical. But that's just what I've heard. I mean, none of that could be completely non-factual. That is just what I've heard.
I've told Anya this before. We need the true story.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody knows the true story. I mean, between Anya, Michelle J., the Boston Pride, the Buffalo Buttes, of course, those were the first 2 Isabel Cup winning teams. We have to figure out what happened with those.
Someone there knows something that the rest of us don't.
Someone knows something, including, although the handles are no longer, they're not like reattached to the cup. Like, where are they actually now?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I didn't think of that. Like, they have to be somewhere. Like, someone's holding on to them.
Someone has them. If Anya says she broke one of them, does she have one? Like, is it kind of like, I interviewed Rebecca Russo once, and she got the hard hat after a Riveters game, and she said she just wanted to break it into pieces, like went full Mean Girls on us. Talk to me about that hat you got on there.
Yeah, the hat, it's kind of stylish, babe.
See, it says Riveter of the Game. Is that, what's up with that?
Yeah, so our team hands out a puck of the game and this hat of the game. And Rebecca Morris had it last game up in Buffalo. And she gave it to me today. So I was pretty happy with that. But I mean, I could, if you could rip this hat into pieces, I'd give it to every one of us today because we fought so hard today for that win.
Did you really just pull a Mean Girls?
It's just plastic. It's really just... Share it.
Yes. Yeah, I definitely did pull a Mean Girls, but I mean, it's definitely a piece of the hat for everyone today.
Like, is that what it is? Like, does every champion just get a chip from the handles to keep? I want to know. I want to know all the things.
Me too, honestly. I really want to know too.
All right.
You got me thinking.
I know. Now I'm just going to have to get Anya on again. She distracted me with Waylon. So I didn't get to get into the deep diving, hard hitting questions. Of course, that's Anya Packer and Madison, their new baby Waylon Packer. Hey, WoHo fans, so glad you joined me on this episode of the Founding Four podcast. As I said in the intro, I'm breaking a little bit of news on the audio podcast. I will be calling about 8 games of the 2020 NWHL season, or the N-double season. And it's kind of interesting because we'll be calling the games from a remote location. So more on that later in the podcast. But Because I'll be calling the games, including the Isabel Cup finals on Twitch for the international community and international viewers, this will make, I guess, 5 straight appearances in the Isabel Cup final for me. It's kind of wild. I started as a journalist reporter and then was able to work on the broadcast. So I've been covering every Isabel Cup final that has actually been played. I was supposed to call that game with Sam Fryman last year. And that's in big part because of the fan base. So as always, I want to thank you for listening to the Founding Four podcast, something that I started with the great stats man with Mike Murphy. I believe we started in season 3 or season 2, season 3, right around there. And it's been a fun ride. So again, just wanted to say thank you to all the longtime listeners. And if you're new, hey, we're going to have a good time. I'm excited to be on the call for the Isabel Cup finals. I'll be calling the semifinals and the final on Twitch. So stay tuned. Let's get back to my interview with Anne. But okay, Anne, let's get into, you and I have talked about this before, and I'm sure all of the people that follow your amazing work at the Ice Garden know a little bit, but for new fans, we're really gearing this toward new fans. First, I'd like for you to go over how you got into women's hockey and some of the things that you do, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the NWHL.
So I would say I really got into women's hockey. I'd kind of followed the NWHL and followed women's hockey a little bit from its conception, with the NWHL's conception in 2015 when I was like 13 years old. But I would say my biggest, my first real foray into the women's hockey world was the 2018 Olympics in Pyeongchang. I remember I stayed up to watch. It was like 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. in Chicago. And I stayed up on a school night. I think it was a school night. I had like finals the next day or something. And I stayed up to watch. And I remember waking up and I was like, did I dream that? Did they really win their first gold medal in 20 years? And I guess from there, it kind of spiraled into, I got more active on women's hockey Twitter, following all the teams. And then in September of 2019, Eleni Domestahas and Michelle J asked me if I would join, or if I would submit an application to join the Ice Gardens team, and everything from there is history, I guess.
I love it. Fantastic. You're such an amazing voice in the women's hockey space. Of course. And the Ice Garden, of course. I also was a part of the Ice Garden. Still love what the Ice Garden is doing. I know just today, one of the many stories that I saw as I was perusing through the WoHo news was Mike talking about stats. What's your engagement? What's your thoughts about the access to women's hockey stats as it exists right now?
Well, I think stats are super important. Obviously, the eye test is very important when you're actually watching women's hockey and able to decipher good plays from bad plays. But I think knowing stats and knowing box scores and knowing who's scored in what games and who gets the assists is tremendously important, both for tracking like personal player records and also just tracking like from a team standpoint, like the offense and the goals for and the goals against of a certain team. I think that's hugely important as a measurement and a landmark of certain teams' growth. And so that's why I think it's pretty important. And I think the work that Mike Murphy is doing with Her Hockey Counts and the work that Bo Marchwick is doing with Elite Prospects to preserve women's hockey data is super important, just so we have a record of all the amazing players that are playing right now, because I know there's not a lot of footage from the past. There's not a lot of stats from the past. So I think it's incredibly important that we have, that moving forward, we have these stats and we have this history.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned Bo as well. Can't forget Elite Prospects. And absolutely, I'm definitely more of an eye test person, but you made an absolutely wonderful case for why the stats matter. And, you know, in Mike's latest piece, he also talks about that the athletes themselves are really focused on the stats. I hear that we might get some stats news and that there's even more of an impetus on stats going into the N double or the bubble season, as we like to call it. But so we'll have to see. Anya teased that a little bit, so we'll see if we get an announcement. Yeah, we'll see if we get an announcement soon. But I want to get back to the NWHL. So we did the quick 101 version. Here we are. We are at, on the cusp of entering a new year, 2021, which I alluded to a little bit just now. The NWHL will be in a bubble. So they will have essentially a single site season. It's very condensed. But I want to get your thoughts again, because you're my resident expert. You have put together a fantastic intro guide for women's hockey. When you think about the 2021 season for the NWHL in particular, what are some of the things that you are really excited about to follow in 2021?
I think there are a lot of interesting storylines to follow. From a team perspective, I mean, there's Rebecca Russo coming back, there's Kelly Babstock joining the Riveters, but also from a broader perspective, I think the introduction of Whale GM, General Manager Amy Shear, I think that's going to be huge just in terms of partnerships for the Whale and getting the Whale onto a bigger stage. And I think that before she left the Whale, Bray Ketchum-Peel did an amazing job recruiting players to join that squad. And so I would say what I'm most looking forward to this bubble season is the Whale, just because I think this could be their year, because like I mentioned before, they're the only team of the founding four not to have won an Isabel Cup yet. So I think this could be their year.
There we go. Talking about data and trends. Of course, we all know that actually Anya put it this way, COVID claimed the 2020 Cup. So that does still mean that a founding four team can win the Isabel Cup. And of course, that would be the Connecticut Whale. I have them prominently featured here on my faux tree. Yeah. Actually, Laura Brennan made that for the team, and she offered ornaments to the broadcasters as well. So I'm very thankful for that. I have it for over a year now. Yeah. And so, yeah, I'm excited, of course, as someone who has been on the call for Connecticut Whale teams for the past almost 3 seasons, actually 3 seasons now. That's a team that has definitely struggled. I love that you mentioned Bray Ketchum-Peel, of course, an OG Riveter when she played in the league, but made her way as you mentioned, as general manager for the Connecticut Whale. But also Amy, who had worked with the New York Rangers, has a totally different skill set as opposed to Bray, who had been a player at Yale and then, of course, with the Riveters in the NWHL. But that leads me to also wanting to ask you, Anne, about interim commissioner Ty Taminia. There's a new model for the NWHL, as opposed to all of the NWHL and essentially the front office owning the founding four teams, plus then the Minnesota Whitecaps. Once we got the news that the Toronto Six joined the fold, Ty Taminia was a part of that expansion. Then we saw that the NWHL switched to a governance model. And so I know I had to talk to Anya and a few other people to kind of understand the governance model. But Anne, how would you summarize the shift from what we saw in the first 5 seasons of the NWHL to what we will now see in season 6, with the addition of not only the Toronto Six, but also Ty Taminia and the governance model?
Well, I would say the new oh my goodness, I can't speak. I'm sorry. The governance model, it gives a lot more flexibility and room to teams. And I think it'll increase the level of competition for sure, just because there's a lot more accessibility to different resources for teams with the new governance model, at least the teams that are independently owned right now, like the Boston Pride and the Toronto Six. I think we're definitely going to see some differences in the competition level just based on what resources the players have available to them. But otherwise, I think it was a great move by the league to shift to a governance model. I can't say that I completely understand all of the intricacies of the new model, but I would say it's a step in the right direction to ensuring that all of the athletes are treated equally and treated professionally.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing that I understand, and I really asked Ani, I was like, all right, explain this to me. Like, I'm baby way, because I need help understanding. I think the biggest thing, my takeaway was that with the governance model, now there are multiple eyes on the 6 teams as a whole, as opposed to at the time, just Danny Ryland. And of course, we know Danny Ryland is the founder of the NWHL and former commissioner. She has now taken on the responsibility of the 4 teams. And so that would be the Minnesota Whitecaps, the Connecticut Whale, the Metropolitan now Riveters, and the Buffalo Beauts. Those are the 4 teams that are not, as you mentioned, independently owned. Danny Ryland, Kearney now, has taken on the responsibility of finding ownership for those 4 teams. And so whereas Danny was basically like the one person, I get the sense that the governance model, and there is a governor, so to speak, for each of the 6 teams. I've been trying to find out who these governors are. I'm still working on that.
I'm really interested, because I didn't realize that meant each team had like a representative.
Correct.
Until you just mentioned it. But now I'm like kind of like, ooh, like I really want to know who's each team's governor.
I'm working on it. So I think, you should inquire as well. But yeah, that's the sense that I get, that each team has a representative, and it's now truly a board, right? So 6 individuals who represent their respective team, but then collectively represent the league. And that creates a different checks and balances, if we're being honest, than when you have the founder who also serves as the commissioner. When I spoke to Ty Taminia, she now is responsible, similar to if we were to just use a hockey model that people are most probably familiar with. If we use the NHL as a model to just kind of summarize what we're trying to say, if Gary Bettman were the owner of all, what is it now, 32 teams, right?
Yeah, I think so.
That's what the NWHL used to be. Gary Bettman owned all of those teams, so decisions could be made by Gary and, his front office. But of course, we know that that's not how the NWHL the NHL runs. The NHL has ownership, and those owners have stock. And essentially, Gary Bettman, as the commissioner of the NHL, is responsible for executing what the owners or that board of owners, what they want to see put forth. And then the other piece that Gary, as essentially the commissioner, is responsible for is also the NHL Players Association. Mm-hmm. And so now that's another thing that's extremely important, is that now the Players Association becomes essentially a partner and becomes a voice in a more structured way than we've seen in the past to how the league moves forward. And I think that's really exciting. So Anne and I were just talking about the structure of the NWHL that has changed, and I want to let you know a little bit about the structure of the Founding Four podcast. We started as an audio podcast, which is right here with our home at now Transistor FM. We were with SoundCloud, went originally with the Ice Garden, but have transitioned over to Transistor FM and also to video podcasting over at Sports Talk with Erica Lindsay Ayala. Of course, that's me, your host. The way that I fund the Transistor account, the way that I'm able to invest in everything that I need to put on now a video podcast, especially so the hard of hearing community can have access to captions, is through my Patreon page, Sports Talk with ELA. So if you are listening and you are a member of the Patreon posse, thank you so very much. Some of the news that I'll be dropping on this podcast, you already got. So if you want inside news about me and my coverage of sports, Sports Talk ELA is there. I encourage you to join Sports Talk with ELA on Patreon. My Patreon posse is a huge reason why I was able to take the assignment to travel to Florida. Yes, I will be calling games in Florida. There are some things that I have to invest in upfront and that I have to pay my own way for. So again, the Patreon posse is a huge help. So hey, where the money reside, where the money reside, where the money reside. Thank you so much to the Patreon posse. Let's get back to this interview with Anne Tokarski, where we're also going to talk about where the money reside, where the money reside for the NWHL. We've already seen, of course, the 50-50 revenue split, which means that any sponsor that comes in, Twitch is a perfect example. Whatever money Twitch offers to be able to exclusively broadcast the regular season of the NWHL, 50% of that goes to now Titaminia and the NWHL for them to use. And then the other 50% goes to the NWHL Players Association, which of course, Anya Packer, formerly Bottolino, who was a member of the Connecticut Whale, they can use to their discretion. And so the way that the NWHLPA, though, has chosen to use that revenue split is to offer a percentage of that split directly to the players. So it's not as though the PA itself is getting that money. There's actually not really much of an income for the PA. The PA has opted to divert those revenue splits directly to players. So when it comes to salary, and this is still a little bit of a question mark, but Anne, again, I'd love to get your thoughts on diving into what we know about how the NWHL salary works and how this 50-50 revenue split impacts the salary of NWHL players.
Well, I think the 50-50 revenue split is huge. It's tremendous. It's a tremendous step forward for the players who already have to work non-hockey jobs to keep themselves afloat. Obviously, the goal is to have these players play hockey as their primary job and not have to worry about a non-hockey job. And while that might not be super imminent in the future for most of the players currently in the league, I think the NWHLPA is taking pretty impressive strides towards making that a reality. And I think, it's not something you can expect right away, but it's something that you can expect work towards right away. And it's something that you can expect people will be advocating for right away. And so you might not see the result right away, but you can see the work being put in to get to that point.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And, we've seen a lot of different partnerships spark. And we still want to see if some of those partnerships stick. I would say, especially the NBC partnership that we see as far as broadcast. So Twitch still is a part of that. It's a 3-year deal. This 2021 season will be the second year of the 3-year deal, excuse me. But then we see also that the NWHL is going to have the 2 semifinal games and the Isabel Cup final game, so 3 total, on NBC Sports Network, which of course the slogan goes NHL on NBC, but now we will have NWHL on NBC. And your thoughts about that broadcast deal announcement?
Well, I think that broadcast deal was pretty impressive for a league in its 6th year. That was built pretty much from the ground up, I would say. I know there are some people who aren't super happy with it and don't think that NBC deserves a lot of recognition for it, and I'm kind of in the same boat. Like, I don't think NBC deserves so much credit for finally stepping in, but I think it's definitely impressive that the league was able to engineer this deal. And even if it is only for 3 games, I still think that's impressive, and I'm definitely going to be watching. I'm suddenly so glad that my family still has cable.
Yeah, for sure. Right. Absolutely. And I hear you. When it comes to being late in the game, we know how much amazing women's hockey there is that you can stream if you're lucky or pay membership to and watch. But it's very rare that we get women's hockey in particular on broadcast television at prime time nonetheless. But this is what I will offer, because you know me, I'm always pushing for more. But what I will offer is that I see this as an extremely important first step, because if 2020 has taught us anything, it's that for whatever reason, I certainly have theories as to the reasons, but we'll leave that to the side for now. And for whatever reason, more broadcast television partners have put on more women's sports on their network. So even the WNBA, who will celebrate their 25th season next year in 2021, they've seen more network television broadcasts than, certainly in the last several years. And with that uptick, the NWSL, National Women's Soccer League, I should add, has also seen that. And actually the uptick for the NWSL was literally off the charts. I mean, they had to wrap that graphic back around because there was such an increase. But between the WNBA going into their 25th season, and if I'm not mistaken, by next season, the NWSL will be in their 9th season, which is unprecedented for women's soccer. We've seen that as the amount of the number of games on national television in particular, so putting aside their NWSL, had a Twitch deal, putting aside the league pass that the WNBA has. When you're on ESPN, when you're on ABC, when you're on NBC, the number of viewership has skyrocketed. And so do you think that we'll see a similar trend for the NWHL as they now are on NBC?
I'm really hopeful that we will, but I know you've talked about in the past hockey culture and how there are some people out there who are insistent upon dragging women's hockey down, but I think there are more people who just haven't been exposed to it, and those people are going to be flipping through their channels in the beginning of February and see, oh my gosh, women's hockey, this is professional women's hockey on TV. And I think that number of people who might not know about it is going to far outweigh the number of people that have something negative to say. And so I do think that the NWHL is going to see an increase in viewership, and I think it could lead to some pretty big gains for the league moving forward.
I'm excited to see. And I guess we should preface that the NWHL has never been on national network television. Mm-hmm. So whatever the numbers are, if it's just you and I, Anne, that's already an increase of 100%.
Yeah.
So, no, but I put that all in context that truly from a stats perspective, this will be a benchmark and a baseline. And I think the challenge for the NWHL and truly all of women's hockey at the professional level, because again, we haven't talked much about the PWHPA, but the challenge then will be to see what these metrics are with the NBC's sports deal, and then use that as the benchmark. 3 games, this is the viewership that we can get on national television in 3 games. And now how do we expound upon that? It's the same thing that I said about the PWHPA announcing that they got $1 million from Secret, which is fantastic. Mm-hmm. $1 million goes really quickly in a women's hockey league, because they have a similar, I think they're at about 5 regions, which is very close to 6 teams if you think of it that way. 1 million for one sponsor, great, but that's now the benchmark, and everything has to be 1 million plus from here on out. And I'm excited. I'm excited to see what's going to happen. Once again, WOHO fans, women's hockey fans, new and otherwise, I want to thank you for listening to the Founding Four podcast. As you can see in this part 1, I've sprinkled in a little bit of personal news that relates to the NWHL and the NWHL on Twitch. So again, NWHL coverage will be on Twitch from the opening games on January 23rd through the playoffs. But the Isabel Cup semifinals and the final on February 4th and February 6th, respectively, will be aired in the United States on NBC Sports. But for the international audience, I will be calling the games on Twitch. But we will, I believe, have the NBC camera angles, so I'll have to get used to calling off of a monitor. I'm definitely an eye test person. I even said that to Anne, so that'll be an adjustment, but I know with the encouragement of the women's hockey community in the Twitch chat, everything will be just fine. We'll have a great time. I've already started talking to coaches about line pairings. Now that I can't give you, but I'm pretty excited about some of the young talent that's coming into the league from what I have heard from coaches. And I will have that for you for opening day. It's the Metropolitan Riveters versus the Toronto Six. I will be on the call as the analyst, and I already have some really great intel from some of the teams. I'll also be calling, I should say, the second game, which is the Boston Pride versus the Minnesota Whitecaps. That first game is at 1 p.m. Eastern time. The second game is slated for 4 p.m. So I'm starting to talk to the four teams, the players, the coaches, to get a feel for all of the preparation leading up to the N double in Lake Placid, New York. So you're going to want to tune in. It's exciting. There are a lot of challenges that we're all facing, and I don't want to ignore that. I want to acknowledge those of us who continue to really struggle with how to maintain a sense of peace and comfort, given that we're really, as a society, pushing forward and to forge ahead, even though coronavirus is still here. But I will do my best to keep myself, my family, and everyone else that I come into contact safe, and I hope you do the same. But for a little bit, let's all enjoy together the promise of women's hockey, of NWHL hockey. But yes, I am taking my travel and my experience very seriously, and again, for the Patreon posse, I'll share a little bit of that journey for you. So Anne and I talked about a lot more, and you can hear that in part 2. Part 1, this will be dropping on Saturday, and I will drop part 2 on Monday, which is Martin Luther King Day. And I want to also encourage everyone, not just because of the last year, but because of the last 400 years, for you to really take a hard look at how we as a society can turn what Dr. King called a dream of equality, and even the fact that he had to only dream and that he could only dream about equality is an indictment on all of us and the United States. Not just the United States, but this is where I live, this is where I'm from, and that's who he was talking to. It's an indictment on our history, and it's time for us to make manifest the dream that Dr. King had. So on Monday, I'll give you a little bit more of my thoughts on that, but I hope between now, Saturday, and Monday, January 18th, that you are also reflecting on how we can, again, make manifest that dream. Because we should never be dreaming of the day that we have equality. We should already be there. So, you know, I had to get a little deep on you, right? I wasn't going to just let you go away with the NWHL news, but thank you so much for listening to the Founding Four podcast. I would appreciate if you share this episode, you tell everyone, your mama and them, to follow us on social media at Founding4, the number 4 pod. And of course, tune in, whether it's audio version or the video component, to the Founding Four podcast, because there are a lot of great storylines, and I am very honored to share them. Erica Lindsay Ayala, signing out.